Concurrent session 3.2 titled New Horizons of Economic Security will now begin. This session will be moderated by Dr. Anthony Kim from the Heritage Foundation. Dr. Kim, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Team Asan, if I may. It's a great timely gathering once again. We get together every year to talk about what's on the horizon, basically. And this particular session this afternoon is about economics. Nowadays, economic security is a hot theme. And also, I want to emphasize the definition of security nowadays has been expanded and deepened. So I think we're going to have a very exciting conversations. My role is very simple, facilitating our conversation. As you can see, we have a fantastic lineup, 6 speakers, and we have 80 minutes. We may not have enough time, but nonetheless, we'll have a good conversations. Without any further ado, I'd like to very quickly introduce name and affiliations, and we give our distinguished panelists perhaps about 5 minutes to give us kind of big picture scene setter, and then we go from conversation and perhaps if we have enough time, some Q&A. Let me start with Dr. Jeanne Choi. She's with the State Department. She's been handling a lot of, let's say, energy issue. So we need more energy, that's for sure, right? And then next, Professor Gao Fai. Professor Gao from China. He's obviously following a lot of geopolitics and geoeconomics. Glad to have you here, Professor. Our third speaker is, if I may, Dr. Narayanappa Janardhan. And he is from the Abu Dhabi. He is with Anwar Gargash Diplomatic Academy. It's a very important part of the world. We'd love to hear your perspective. Our fourth speaker is Marcus Noland. Dr. Noland is well known in Korea. I think, Marcus, last time when we shared the floor was a few years ago when we talked about China. I'm sure you're going to touch up on China, so we look forward to hearing your perspective. And our fifth speaker is Professor Suzuki Kazuto. He's very well known in the area of geoeconomics. He and I, we've been interacting over the years here in Seoul, Washington, even Helsinki, Finland, so I know how powerful he can be. Last but not least, our dear Minister Myung-hee from Seoul, Korea. I think you've been busy, Minister, if I may. You've been busy during the Trump 1, now Trump 2.0. Perhaps you have a greater demand for your expertise nowadays. Now, with that name and affiliation, let me start with Dr. Choi. Could you start and then entertain us?
Well, entertainment is a high bar, but I will try to give a little bit of a scene setter on what I was asked to speak on today, which is energy security. Energy security obviously is an intrinsic part of economic security, so hopefully I can cover that portion of this panel. Energy, of course, is an essential input into industrial activities as well as defense, and so there's growing awareness and efforts by countries to address energy and critical mineral security and supply chain vulnerabilities, as well as to build greater resilience. There's likely going to be a significant increase in energy demand that will be created by energy-intensive applications such as data centers and AI, and I know we have an expert on AI and chips, so I won't touch too much upon that. But for example, a lot of countries are having to adjust their energy projections. Even countries like Japan, that was expecting a decline in energy demand for the first time in their recent 7th strategic energy plan, they are now projecting that their energy demand will remain constant or even increase. So countries are really facing a choice in how to meet this growing demand. LNG, nuclear, other sources, it really depends on the market and its unique conditions, of course, but governments also do have a role to play in incentivizing certain paths through policy. Of course, for countries with fewer domestic energy resource endowments, like Korea and Japan, they will have a higher dependence on imports, which is another factor in energy security, or rather perhaps energy insecurity. For even beyond just this region, in recent years, conflict and war in the Ukraine and the Middle East has kind of amped up this sense of uncertainty and energy insecurity because of the potential supply disruptions. There's also been shipping disruptions through the Red Sea and the Panama Canal that have impacted energy security, as well as natural disasters which knock out production, including U.S. oil and gas production in the Gulf, or even droughts that reduce availability of, say, hydropower in China and Europe. Energy and critical minerals are a strategic priority of this Trump administration. This, of course, as you have heard many times, includes the expansion of U.S. Production of oil and gas. Many countries are interested in increasing the purchases of U.S. oil and gas. We're currently in a bit of a tighter LNG market, in the short term at least, until we have a wave of new projects coming online from both the US but also Qatar as well as they expand their LNG production. This wave of new supply could have implications for existing as well as emerging markets. I'm thinking in particular in the Indo-Pacific, Southeast Asia will become a new center for demand possibly. And also in mature markets like Europe that are looking to replace Russian gas with alternatives. And of course, in the aftermath of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the increase in US LNG really filled that gap. Finally, I'm just going to touch a little bit at the end of my opening remarks on critical mineral supply chain security and resilience, because this is also a major concern for many governments due to these minerals being necessary inputs into advanced technologies and defense applications. There's a lot of concern around the increasing geographic concentration of critical mineral supply chains. And many of these supply chains are dominated by a single or few producers, both on the upstream mining side, but especially in the case of the downstream processing side. Such concentration of supply chains is inherently risky, as we all experienced during the COVID pandemic, when a few suppliers get knocked off and it has ripple effects for the entire supply chain around the world. So there have been many efforts to diversify supply chains. But this, of course, takes time and significant investment, so it's not a story that is an overnight success or failure, but one that we will have to keep tracking. So I will stop there. I'm hopefully within my 5 minutes.
Thank you, Jeanne. That was just perfect entertainment to start. Your foggy bottom perspective, obviously, kind of measured, but I really appreciate kind of setting the tone in terms of the horizon. And also, we'll come back to this, but if there's any biggest change, the biggest change from Biden to Trump administration is probably energy policy. So big shift happened from, let's say, green energy focused on more conventional fossil for LNG, as you mentioned, and everything. So we'll come back to that for greater further discussions. Now, Professor Gao, your perspective, let's say from China,
Yes.
the new emerging horizon for security, economic security.
Okay, thank you, Dr. King. In China, we say that today we experience profound changes as the century. In other words, this profound change, that is crisis. I think today our world is in crisis, both politically, militarily, and also economically. Some crises, I think, that's originating from naturally, such as earthquake, tsunami, and others are man-made. And in terms of economy, or today's world also has facing very serious challenge. Some challenge from economic development per se, such as science and technology development that's created some new opportunity, but also has some ethnic problem of science and technology, like AI replaced, robots replaced some men jobs. And in past 40 years, we benefited a lot from economic globalization. I think all the countries in this world benefited from economic cooperation worldwide. But economic globalization also expanded, enlarged the gap between the poor and the rich. And it's also created some troubles, I think. Economic globalization is not perfect. But today, I think the most serious challenge from United States. I have to say that partly because the recent reciprocal tariff against Americans' global partners that's created a lot of troubles, especially to China. the US already posed 145% tariff against China. I think this happened only during the wartime. Unbelievable. So I think United States is a unique country. This year marks 80 years the South Korea's independence. It also marks 80 years United Nations. I think since World War II, all over the world, we learn a lot from the past. We know the cooperation, especially big power collaboration, that's important. The international order that's meet every country's national interest. As a dominant power, I think we appreciated United States' contribution in the past. But of course, in the past, American, I think, provide public goods for the world, for our economic, politically stability and peace, and also economic prosperous. But today, use these public goods to seek rent that created some troubles for today's world. From China's side, I think it's very clear China benefited a lot from our reform and opening up. That means we connected with globalization, cooperate with other countries, not benefit China alone, but I think both the world, all the countries, I think that's like other countries benefited from globalization. From China's side, China is willing to cooperate with all nations to settle our mutual challenge, including economic challenge. But today, I think China's policy pretty unique. The first countries, China stand up against Americans' reciprocal tariff. We have to use retaliatory tariff against the same level against the Americans. I think China do this partly because China is the second largest economy and also number one in terms of manufacturing industry. If China do nothing, no any country can do something to stop this kind of weaponized tariff against the global trade partners. And for China's side, it's not only for safeguarding our national interest, but also for defending the world order. Of course, in the last administration in the United States, we have a lot of dispute. What is a rules-based international order? And China emphasizes international law-based international order. But the current problems is the political system, the policy, like a pendulum. Right now, China is here, Americans here. But today, the US policy is here. So it's not easy for China to follow. For China's side, if China can continue our policy, I think China will insist to fight for a fairness or justice for this tariff policy, partly because the current China-US bilateral trade little bit dropped to less than 3% in China's total GDP. Not so serious. Of course, U.S. is still number one in a specific country, number one economy partner to China, but important, but not so important. The second, China's, we have BRI, I think more than 10 years. I noticed last year China and the BRI countries bilateral trade already share more than 50% in China total international trade. And the dual circulation economy in China, dual circulation not means China want to a closed door, but we have to know, like today's trade war, since 2018, the product components, I think most product components China can be replaced by local products. So China will have more economic secure. And today, of course, the last I want to say, China is willing to cooperate with all nations, including United States. We are willing to negotiate and talk, have dialogue to address the mutual economic problems. But I think American side need to show us credibility. We cannot make concessions today and you change your position tomorrow. I stop here.
Thank you, Professor Gao. I appreciate your big picture, and I don't mean it in a sarcastic way. Your professorial and diplomatic kind of setup here, really appreciate, so we'll have a further discussion. And I really want to go straight into Washington by inviting Marcus Noland, but to manage our conversation in a more, let's say, smooth way, we'll stop by Middle East. So I want to invite Dr. Janardhan, because the Middle East is a very important player, obviously, when it comes down to economic security and energy security. And what you've been doing is very critical. So let us know what's going on from your perspective.
Thanks, Anthony. And thanks to Asan Institute and Dr. Jeanne, who invited me. I thought you almost bypassed me. Middle powers always get squashed. I'm sitting in between two superpowers, in a sense. We heard a lot about the US and Europe yesterday and today. To me, and forgive me for being blunt, I think that's the old world. And let me provide a contrarian view, because I'm not a typical academic. I'm more of a pracademic. I'm a trainer. I train diplomats. And so I think we need to give our young diplomats a very, very realistic perspective rather than give them an old perspective. And I think I want to talk about the new world that is evolving. Because I think there is little doubt in my mind that if the current trend continues and if Trump's policies continue the way they're going, then it's more likely that the process of a post-US world is going to be hastened. I think this process started already 2 decades ago. Not much attention has been given to this process, but I think we need to pay more attention. Because more than arguing about whether this is a unipolar, bipolar, tripolar, multipolar, non-polar sort of world, I think we should begin to see this from the prism of middle powers. I think today middle powers are more powerful. They are more powerful because they are multi-aligned, they are multi-networked, and they live in a multiplex world. Multiplex in the sense of being multiple powers, amid multiple powers in a complex world. And they're using new tools of diplomacy, which is minilateralism, as a potent tool to achieve their goals, which makes the role of the United States less important and not more. So it's also a flatter world, driven by technology. Thomas Friedman said that the world is flat, but I don't think it's flat. It's flatter than it used to be. It'll get flatter as we move on, and again, due to technology, where ideology is less important. It's more pragmatic world, where geoeconomics is more important than geopolitics. Geoeconomics driving geopolitics more than the other way around, where partnerships are more important than alliances. I think that's also very important. Alliances are ideological, partnerships are non-ideological. And I think these dynamics have recalibrated the supply chain mechanisms, where South-South cooperation, I know somebody said they don't like the term global South, global majority, yes, whatever you want to call it, but South-South cooperation has made remarkable gains, and where they trade and transfer technology more than between the North and South. I think that's also an important aspect to keep in mind. As a result, we are not in the era of globalization. Some people are talking about deglobalization. I don't think we are in the era of deglobalization. We are in the era of reglobalization, where the entire supply chain mechanism is being rewritten. And I think in this new age, the economic, diplomatic, and the security dynamics cannot be treated in silos. They are more interlinked than ever before. Non-traditional security is becoming more important than traditional security. We've heard a lot about traditional security all morning and afternoon, but I think we need to pay attention to non-traditional security, which makes collaborations more comprehensive. And there's also a new attempt at decentralized globalism, or regionalism, where most regions are trying to look for regional solutions to regional problems. They don't no longer rely on global powers to solve their problems, at least in our part of the Middle East. And let me explain all these broad terms that I've thrown out there with some examples of the Gulf-Asia ties that have grown exponentially during the last 2 decades. So just to broaden the vision of what we've been talking about all along. Today, Gulf Asia ties are not just about oil, trade, and expatriates, which was what it was in the past. They are not just transactional. They've become very strategic. In fact, all the partnership agreements that are being signed are being called strategic and comprehensive partnership agreements. They're pursuing strategic autonomy, and there is even strategic ambivalence. In fact, I argue that strategic ambivalence of middle powers and small powers is increasing their strategic autonomy. Today, they are able to call the shots much more than before. I think that's important to remember as well. And this means that rather than focus on Western or superpower-driven military prowess, many of the Gulf Asia ties are being handled by what I call as many Cs: capital, commerce, connectivity, collaboration, cyber, which is tech, climate issues, competition, and there is compromise as well. All of these Cs are in a way combining to facilitate Gulf Asia trade to jump from 45 billion in 2000 to 650 billion in the last few years, which is nearly 15 times more than what it was at the turn of the century. So there it is, an example of how there is greater South-South cooperation, greater rewiring of the entire economic mechanism. While China, India, South Korea, and Japan are the main contributors to these numbers, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Qatar are the chief partners from the Gulf. And while several Asian economies have grown rapidly, Gulf countries have also focused on economic diversification, development of non-oil economy, which has led to East-East complementarity and camaraderie. So the quest for development of new infrastructure, clean energy, and tech projects have encouraged new innovative ties that are defying the old norms. And what this has done is that South Korea is now a competitor with the United States and Europe. For example, in 2009, South Korea bid for the $20 billion civil nuclear energy project in UAE, and the competitors were United States and France, and South Korea won that bid. And similarly, in the oil industry too, the United States is actually a competitor with the Gulf countries now, supplying oil to India at about the same price as the Gulf countries, despite the distance between United States and India. So there is a great deal of competition even among allies or partners. I think that's key to remember as well. And what this has meant is that as Gulf Asia ties have grown, Gulf Europe, Gulf US, Gulf West ties in general have diminished, and trade numbers speak a lot. So the last piece in this maze is the quest for security amid regional instability, both in the Gulf and in Asian regions. And given the sooner or later inevitable end to the free riders arrangement that we have had, I think there are a number of new Gulf Asia mechanisms that are in play and that could lead to a new security architecture in the future. And these span bilateral, minilateral cooperation. They throw up a host of new possibilities, and where maritime safety is really important. And this is where non-traditional security comes in, and they will dictate economic security as we move forward. We've seen new security partnerships in the recent past. UAE, Korea, United States, yes, but less talked about is the UAE, India, France partnership, which includes maritime security. There is Saudi Arabia and China doing exercises for the first time in the last 2-3 years. There's UAE and China doing exercises in the last few years. And so we've seen a fair bit of these sort of arrangements going on. Why not more new arrangements? Why not UAE and India and South Korea working together? Why not India, South Korea, and Japan work together in a partnership, not necessarily with the United States, because then it goes back into the sort of quad prism and trying to contain China, etc. What we need is economic security. What we need is security of the supply chain mechanisms. Can we work together with or without the US? Yes, possibly yes. And and I think the future, if we're going to have more trade in the seas, in the oceans, maritime security is important because the threats are not from nations, but from non-state actors and from piracy. We need to tackle that. And to conclude, I think the future for South Korea and Asia is not just about alliances with US and NATO. but strengthening partnerships with other emerging countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And with the South contributing more than half the global GDP, the world is really larger than just the United States and Europe. And South Korea, we heard in the morning, should be looking to somehow strengthen G7, become part of G7 in some form. I have a bit of free advice. I think you need to promote G20 and see if you can have a G30 by 2030. Thank you.
That's perfect, Dr. Janardhan. I really appreciate your keen observations here. You're not only connected what Jeanne and Professor Gao shared with us, you also expanded and sharpened our focus, which creates great landing zone for Dr. Marcus Noland, because obviously, it's all interwoven, interconnected, and I think that what you just laid out here is really something that we shouldn't miss out, obviously. And whenever I visit either Qatar or UAE, my last visit was in Dubai for the COP Summit, UN. I mean, the energy level, not only energy in really, or finance and other things, greater dynamism going on. So with that note, I'd like to introduce Marcus without any, being shy about it. Just let us know what's up.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank the Asan Institute for the invitation. As some of you know, I've been dealing with a health issue, and this is the first time that I've been able to travel internationally since getting sick. So I am indeed happy to see you. Or as Keith Richards once put it in a different context, I'm happy to see anybody. Honest, I don't see a lot of economic security on the horizon. The U.S. and South Korea have a history of cooperation in the military area. We have a mutual defense treaty. In trade, we're both members of the WTO, and we have a free trade agreement. And more recently, we've cooperated, both countries have passed legislation, and we've cooperated on supply chain security issues. The election of Donald Trump as President of the United States puts cooperation in all three of these areas at risk. Trump inherited a free trade agreement with Korea, which he had renegotiated during the previous administration to move it away from free trade, to make it more restrictive. A series of initiatives undertaken by the Biden administration, namely the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act, and the Chip 4 alliance with South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan. And through those, or because of those, South Korean firms made big investments in the United States and received billions of dollars of subsidies. Within days of taking office, Trump called all this into question. He called for the repeal of the CHIPS Act. I don't think that's going to happen, mainly because a lot of that money went into Republican districts, and Mike Johnson wouldn't be able to pass the legislation through his own caucus if it came up. He undercut NATO and cooperation with Ukraine, bringing into question whether and how the United States would respond in case of an attack on South Korea, which has been the topic of a number of the other sessions. And most saliently here, he imposed arbitrarily unilateral tariffs, including on South Korea, without any reference to existing treaty obligations through the WTO or through KORUS. Our modeling work at PIIE indicates that these tariffs will permanently slow the growth rate of the United States and South Korea in raising prices. The IMF, in its semi-annual World Economic Outlook released yesterday in Washington, cut South Korea's growth rate in half. So, in short, the U.S. has gone rogue, and it is questionable whether any past or future agreements will be honored, at least as long as Trump is in office. That leaves South Korea in a real bind. The normal policy recommendation under these circumstances is to diversify away from the United States, and South Korea can look to Europe, it can look to Southeast Asia, other parts of the world. And the most obvious thing that South Korea could do, the most obvious concrete thing it could do, is join CPTPP, right? Should have joined it a long time ago, but now there's a real reason to do it. But the two most obvious markets, if you were trying to diversify away from the U.S., the big nearby markets are China and Japan. and both of them are problematic. Both of them have used economic coercion against South Korea in the past. But the sort of bigger devil, I mean, the little devil is less frightening than the big devil. So if you're going to tilt towards Japan. And then the critical issue comes up is whether Korea, Japan, and Taiwan should continue cooperation in supply chain resiliency in semiconductors with or without the United States. So if the United States wants to participate, great. It'll still be the Chips 4 alliance. If the United States goes its own way, then fine. You can have the 3 Asian countries continue to cooperate. Finally, there's been a lot of talk about shipbuilding, and I don't understand it. Maybe somebody here can explain it. I mean, I'm totally serious. I really don't understand it. And, Kurt Campbell was really making shipbuilding, So here's what I understand. In the United States, we have something called the Jones Act. That means that ships used in the United States have to be American bottoms. That means we can't simply buy ships from South Korea or from Poland or somebody else that can produce them more cheaply than we can. But we can't assemble them domestically either. It's not like South Korean shipbuilding firms could invest in the United States and then build the ships there. Ships are intensive in 2 things when you're producing them: steel and semi-skilled labor. Well, we've got a 25% tariff on steel, and we don't have an abundance of semi-skilled labor. So we really can't produce them at home. So maybe South Korea can do some repair work in third countries like the Philippines more cheaply than we can. But if that's the argument, that's a pretty weak beer, small change, whatever metaphor you want to use, in the context of this overall dysfunctionality.
Thank you for that candid observation. I knew you're not going to disappoint us, so appreciate your straightforward, very much, see things as they are. Peterson Institute for International Economics is well known for analytical, empirical research, and obviously you've been with them for long years. No wonder you just cut things through and then let us know really what's going on. So we'll come back for the greater discussion. Now, next up is Professor Kazuto from Japan. Suzuki, last year when you and I were in Finland, the big thing was, again, like geoeconomics and uncertainty, because it was before the election. Now we passed the election. Now we know what's going on. And then Japan has been busy. Your prime minister visited Washington, big meetings last week. Let us know, how do you see this evolving, let's say, economic security horizons?
Right. Well, thank you, Andrew, and thank you very much for Asan Institute to invite me for the. I think this is the 3rd time that I'm speaking on in the Asan Plenum, and I am very happy that this, economic security has been always on the agenda, and I think this is an extremely important subject in not just the hard power security, but also in a broader sense how we should reconsider and reconceive the idea of the economy impacting on the politics and the international relations. And when we come to the question of the economic security, I think this is all about the risks and how do we mitigate and mitigate the risks, and how do we meet the challenges which are using the economic coercion. Well, Marcus has mentioned about Japan has exercised the economic coercion. Yes, we did in 2019 on the, when there was an issue between South Korea and Japan, but I think that was the historically only case that Japan used the economic coercive measures against other country. And since then, we understood that there are a lot to lose rather than gain to exercise the economic security or economic coercion. So I think there is a very much of the learning process in Japan, and I think when South Korea needs to understand what's going on between Japan and South Korea, I think this sort of a learning process is necessary to take into account. Well, with regard to the current situation in Japan, yes, Japan is in a very awkward position. Japan, it is not like a U.S.-South Korea free trade agreement, but Japan and the United States have the trade agreement on goods, so TAG. The Japan-U.S. TAG is supposed to fix the tariff level. So the United States will not impose tariffs on, let's say, automobile. Automobile is supposed to be stuck with a 2.5%, which is now 25%, so it's 10 times more. And also, maintaining the Japanese tariff on rice and other things. So that was a basic understanding, which was concluded in 2019, so that it was Mr. Trump himself signed this Japan-U.S. trade agreement on goods. But nevertheless, there is no consideration for the unilateral tariff, so that there was a very much of the significant impact on the Trump tariff on Japan. But at the same time, Mr. Trump is taking Japan as the most preferred negotiating partner to start the tariff negotiation. So Mr. Akazawa, who is the minister in charge of the economic planning, was in Washington, D.C. That was more or less a sort of a reconnaissance mission, so to understand what the United States want and what the United States demand. The point is that we understand that U.S. wants something, but the problem is that the whole unilateral so-called reciprocal tariff is based on the idea of the diminishing the trade deficit. So no matter what you do, the objective of the tariff is to diminish the trade deficit, then it is very difficult to negotiate. So, and of course, there is a certain political performance needs to be shown by Mr. Trump. So taking that 24% against Japan to reduce will not be the sort of an ideal position. So the Mr. Shiba and Mr. Akazawa and the economic security team are now in discussion about what we can do to make Mr. Trump happy while we are getting the most to reduce the risks of the tariffs. So probably what we do is that to remain the reciprocal tariff as 24% as it is, but try to make an exemptions on different items. It is very difficult to find the exemptions on the automobile, which is the crucial part, and the steel. And this will mean probably there will be some sort of a wild card, which is the question of the Nippon Steel acquisition of the U.S. steel. So there are so many things. The complex issues are connected, and I think the next week Mr. Akazawa will visit Washington D.C. again, and probably in the G7 summit in June, Mr. Ishiba and Mr. Trump will conclude the tariff negotiation. So that's the current planning. But whether is it really an economic security? I don't think so. This is basically a tariff negotiation, and the point is that we are now regarding the United States as a risk. So in the past, the reason why Japan started the concept, Japan developed the concept of economic security. It was the trigger was the 2010, the Chinese decision of strict export control on the rare earth mineral, and Japan suffered from the difficulties of access, and over-dependency on one country is now being the bigger risk for the Japanese industry. So since then, in 2022, Japan has set up the Economic Security Promotion Act, and ever since, we are updating our economic security action plans. The point is that now the United States is in the picture of the Economic Security Promotion Act, and then we are seeing that what sort of things that we are depending on the United States, and especially, the question of food, energy, and many other things, including the cloud services and other IT businesses. So these are the kind of issues so that in the Economic Security Promotion Act, we designate the critical items which are very strategically important items that we don't want to over-dependent, and one of which is now is a cloud service. So the American origin services are also being questioned by Japanese, and now we are building the data center and its own submarine cables, etc., to make sure that we have our own autonomous strategic autonomy, not a fully autonomous, capabilities, but strategic autonomy to make sure that we can reduce the risks of depending on both United States and China. So in that regard, the Japan and ROK relationship is extremely important because Japan and ROK has a very similar industrial structure, and we are also suffering from both the economic coercion from China and tariff policy from the United States. So I think there is a lot of ongoing discussion about Japan and ROK to make sure that we'll be able to coordinate our policies towards the United States. Meanwhile, Japan, ROK, and China are now in discussion for the free trade agreement. So that's another avenue that Japan is trying to take. Japan and ROK is trying to take to diversify the potential risky supply chain. So I'll stop here, but looking forward to further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Suzuki. I'm based in Washington. Based on that, depending on whom you talk to, there are people who are saying this is Trump risk, and there are, the other side, people saying it's a Trump opportunities. So as you pointed out, it's a tricky challenge for all of us, perhaps, how to minimize that risk and maximize potential opportunities. And I want to offer one footnote. Maybe, Japan has been going through this kind of thinking process in advance and ahead of many others, at least in Indo-Pacific theater, because as you briefly mentioned, Japan has the only major country, as far as I know, there's like an economic security ministry. I mean, it's not full-scale ministry, but the fact that Japan has established economic security ministry, minister level, I think that's very notable.
Yep.
Let me ask this question, if I may, Minister. Are you getting more frustrated? How do you feel?
Well, good question. First of all, I would like to thank Asan Institute for inviting me today. And more frustrated? Yes, because I participated in Korea-US amendment negotiation as a chief negotiator, and through hard work from both sides, we concluded the amendment negotiations. But in spite of all the FTA, original FTA back in 2006, and also amendment negotiations several years ago, overnight, US decided to impose is 25% for Korea, 25% reciprocal tariff. So knowing that how hard we negotiated on every detail of the market access in original FTA and also amendment negotiations, it's really frustrating to see the outcome can change overnight. But having said that, let me discuss also overall perspective on economic security as well. Because after hearing from 5 distinguished experts, I feel like a bit of like a blind man trying to describe an elephant. Each of 5 experts has offered a perspective on a specific part of economic security, whether it is energy, supply chain resilience, or tariff measures, or trade agreements. But you might be still wondering, so what is economic security after all? Because it's really massively elastic and evolving concept that can be shaped by each country's economic structures or technological capabilities, and also their own strategic priorities. Kazuto-san mentioned that it is basically managing or mitigating risks. But businesses, they are ready to take risks, to have more market access, to expand market access. And that becomes the engine of economic growth for countries like Korea. So I'd like to just take a step back and reflect on some broader picture about especially economic security, because economic security has been a very defining feature of our economic and trade policy for the last several years. But from a really trade expert's perspective, I've been sometimes very skeptical about the overreach of economic security. So let me offer 3 views that deserve some reflection today. First, risks of economic security, and second, US trade measures, especially tariff measures in the context of economic security, and third, so what can we do? So first, regarding the risks of economic security, I understand that countries have valid reasons to pursue economic security, especially in these times of geopolitical uncertainties. However, those policies come with a cost. Higher prices for businesses and households, and also reduced market access and slower economic growth for government. And especially another concern is the ever-expanding notion of economic and national security. More and more economic or technological concerns are being classified as national security issues, leading to a growing list of government interventions and discretions. And if this trend continues, where countries use economic security as a blank check to justify a wide range of unilateral trade and industrial measures, it could really undermine the innovation and productivity and dynamism of our economy. And this leads me to my second point, the US trade measures, especially recent US trade measures in the context of economic security. As you know, that the Trump administration, they imposed various trade measures in the name of economic security, because they invoked national and economic security authorities, including the reciprocal tariff that you mentioned, which was invoked under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, and also Section 232 tariffs on steel, aluminum, and potentially some other products that is also invoked based on national security threats or national security concerns. And so these actions are based on the premise that US trade deficits and declining manufacturing capacity poses not only economic challenges, but also national security threats. So this really shows that very expensive framing of national security and can blur the line between legitimate security concerns and some sort of protectionism. And in some cases, these unilateral tariff measures risk undermining or conflicting with other security, national security or economic security objectives. For example, consider the semiconductor sector. US has expanded or strengthened its export controls on chips, but at the same time, US is conducting investigations, Section 232 investigation on semiconductors, which might lead to potential tariff measures in the future. So this compounds Korean and also Japanese businesses' problems, because they face commercial restrictions in one market and also potential cost increases in another market. And that raises a question, are these measures taken together, either strengthening or undermining the very innovation networks that we try to secure and we try to build. So we have to think about that in some ways, through layers of security or economic security measures, we may be weakening the very ecosystem needed for technological advancement and also supply chain resilience. So my last point, let me turn to the last point. What can we do? How to right-size the definition of economic security and how to strike a balance between legitimate security concerns and some sort of economic needs and openness. Well, I don't have a really silver bullet magic answer on that, but what I would like to suggest that, at least it might be too ambitious to come up with some rules, but at least like-minded countries or middle powers, whatever you call them, they could start discussing and developing some shared understandings and some working principles. For example, these could include some minimum or bare minimum principles like non-discrimination or transparency and consultation, and also close coordination for businesses to adapt to these changing policies. I think through these efforts, some sort of shared understandings that can start among middle power countries or like-minded countries first, if not globally, they could help economic security measures remain targeted and proportionate and also limited to genuine security concerns. Let me stop here about the specific negotiation strategy or issues. I would be happy to answer any questions from the audience later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. You did very nice wrap up of the session for initial remarks. I just want to make a note that, again, economic security nowadays is a national security, it's also energy security, and it's a cyber security, it's also public health security. So as you pointed out, how to make fine balance, I think that's really important. President Trump in Washington, more than ever, he likes signing executive order. And one of them he did earlier, like in February, is America First Investment Policy Executive Order. There, if you read it carefully, explicitly, he said, economic security is national security. So we are in that era. I think at least for the while, or for the time being, we have to juggle. Let's see what happens, what comes out. But for the first round of conversation, I want to invite any willing speakers, but I want to point out perhaps Jeanne and Dr. Janardhan, because I'm going to ask you about energy question, especially nuclear, because we haven't talked about that much yet, nuclear part. When I said to you, Jeanne, the big shift from the Biden administration to the Trump administration, I think green energy agenda is, at this point, I think we can say it's relatively low profile, if not gone. And we see more muscular energy policy being coordinated and cultivated at the Department of Energy. And Secretary Chris Wright, he is very straightforward about the idea of pursuing greater nuclear energy. You mentioned data center and all that. Not just the conventional big nuclear power plants, but SMR, small modular reactor. Obviously, South Korea has been paying attention to it, trying to develop. Any comments on this nuclear dimension? And also, Dr. Janardhan, you reminded us this greater partnership between South Korea and UAE, this nuclear power plants. Despite other options, UAE, South Korea, we came down to this, let's say, Korea model. And then other speakers, Marcus, you always have a very analytical mindset. You, once again, reminded us, hey, let's go step by step. Shipbuilding sounds great, but if you can add anything on this nuclear cooperation between United States and South Korea, what kind of hurdles there may be? Idea may be, it sounds great, but as you pointed out, like a shipbuilding, what kind of potential hurdles we may have. So that's kind of my general question, but I'd like to invite Jeanne. You don't have to make a long statement. Anything you can touch on will be great for our audience.
Sure, and before I answer that question, I should have started this whole panel with the standard disclaimer that the views that I express today are my own personal and not necessarily those of the US government. And I feel like I especially have to say this in answering this question because I am not a policymaker, I'm an energy analyst in the State Department. But nuclear is one of those bright points that on both sides of the aisle it seems to be an opportunity rather than a risk, as some of our other speakers have highlighted. You rightly point out the role that small modular reactors, SMRs, can play for a lot of markets around the world. As opposed to these larger conventional nuclear power plants, which require a huge deal of upfront capital expenditure, SMRs are smaller and leaner, can be plugged into existing grids without a lot of necessary upgrades in grid infrastructure. There is especially a lot of potential for SMRs in countries that need to increase their energy supply for things like data centers, for things that are fit for purpose. And so SMRs, Secretary Wright, as you pointed out, has highlighted, actually he highlighted 4 areas of potential US-Korean energy cooperation, and SMRs were one of them, along with LNGs, power grids, and hydrogen as well. So I think there's a lot of enthusiasm around SMRs that has continued on. There's a lot of potential for public-private, as well as private sector cooperation. There was a recent strategic deal reached by HD Hyundai here in Korea and Bill Gates's funded TerraPower to explore cooperation around SMRs. Of course, the technology is still being developed. We don't have a commercially operational SMR in the world yet, and I know that there's a lot of countries that are competing to get the first one operational, and so there's a number of projects that are going forward, but it's still a new technology, and so I think there's a lot of opportunity there, but we'll have to see how that story plays out.
Thanks for reminding us of the TerraPower. I mean, there's a new scale, TerraPower, X Energy. I think we see a lot of emerging technology as well as greater willingness to pursue this SMR. It's not real yet, but we'll get there in due course. Dr. Janardhan.
You've thrown me a bit off my comfort zone because this is really not my expertise, but let me just think aloud. I think the pursuit of civilian nuclear energy in the Gulf was not so much about developing alternative sources of energy or about diversifying their energy basket in some sense. I think at that point, when it was all done, maybe about 15, 20 years ago, it was all more linked to Iranian nuclear program. That's my, just shot in the dark. So at that point, they wanted to pursue this as a way of trying to break out at some point. If Iran goes nuclear, then they want to do it. I think that still is valid. So pursuit of civilian nuclear energy in the Gulf region or in the Middle East, especially among the Gulf Arab states, is, I think, still linked to that dynamic. And I think Saudi Arabia is also having the same thought in mind and wants to do it. And perhaps they have a deal with China in some form, and they're bargaining with the United States to get a better deal, all of that. So to a large extent, if you take that out of the equation, then a lot of it would be about some of these powers which are good with civilian nuclear energy trying to make deals. Like, for example, the United States has just made a deal with India. They're going to not just provide technology now, and for the first time, they've changed the rules of the game, that many of these things will now be done in India, which was not possible in the past. So I think it could be a way of trying to make these sort of new deals. I think South Korea has done a deal with Egypt. The deal originally was between Russia and Egypt, but South Korea came into the mix because of the sanctions on Russia, and now South Korea is developing SMRs for Egypt. I think a lot of these things will happen. So I'm not so sure if it is related to clean energy as much as it is related to a lot of these sort of new economic deals and transfer of technology, because I think one of the key important things is transfer of technology moving forward. None of these countries are going to just buy your technology in the future. They want transfer of technology. That's point number one. I think the more important thing is the focus on renewable energy, on other forms of energy, and that's a huge thing. Just to drop one statistic here, UAE has invested $120 billion in Africa between 2019 and 2024 in a span of 5 years. and $80 billion of that is in the renewable energy sector. So I think more than focus on nuclear energy, there will be a lot of focus on renewable energy moving forward.
Great reminder. I mean, since what happened in Japan, Fukushima, and the whole nuclear conversation was probably negative, but now we see nuclear energy is a clean energy. Look at what's happening in Germany, a lot of European countries. Increasingly, they recognize the necessity and importance of nuclear power. So those reminders you mentioned, civilian nuclear cooperation, I think that's very important.
Victor, just a minute. Security is also important.
Absolutely.
Nuclear security.
Now we
I
have
think,
that.
the UAE fears Iranian, plant
Absolutely.
going bust at some point more than the nuclear weapons itself.
Especially in your region, for sure. So given what we discussed, Dr. Noland, do you like adding anything?
Well, I think that 3 Mile Island killed nuclear energy in the United States before Fukushima. The small modular reactor has been around for a long time. I know somebody in the business, but they've never actually installed one. Perhaps this is a venue for cooperation between the United States and South Korea. I really don't know much about the specifics, but I think that it raises a bigger issue, which is that so it is true. So the Trump administration and the Republican Party more broadly represents climate change denialism, but that's a minority of the country, and at some point power is going to shift. And the United States is going to be interested in pursuing a greener energy policy. And the question is, does pursuing nuclear basically sidetrack you when what you really want to be doing in the long run is renewables? And so I'm not seeing a bull market for SMRs, but who knows? Maybe we'll get one.
Again, we appreciate your healthy skepticism. So I think this is really, for me, SMR, if we have a nuclear submarine, it's a nuclear-powered submarine. Why is it so hard to have SMR? That's my simple kind of, question. I'm not obviously an energy expert, nuclear power expert either, but I think this is something we should definitely explore. If we can make it happen in the context of like-minded, willing partners. I just, for the sake of this conference, US, Japan, Korea, perhaps this SMR is an area we can work together and commercialize it. I think that's the most important part. Technology investment, yes, we need it, but eventually how to commercialize this and then install these SMR, across the country, safety and everything. But anyways, we have about 7 minutes, according to my watch. And then I was told we can have a small number of Q&A. So maybe one or two, if you have any burning questions, indicate. I see a lot of hands going, but the lady here in front of me did a first, so I'll go with you first. And then the gentleman, former Minister Yoon, perhaps one more back down there. So let's collect a question. If you can briefly ask a question, would be great.
So much. Thanks to my dear friend Myung-hee here at Asan Institute. I feel very honored to be here too. And I'm very grateful that Minister Myung-hee, you brought up the issue of the political economy of national security. I also used to work for the Korean National Assembly, but then ever since I saw this manifestation of political economy of national security, I decided to actually quit my job and then, transition into the finance world and then the startup world. But then, just to share a bit of my story, back in New York, while I was working as a financial sanctions consultant, I could really see that lots of US government officials and even consultants like me were so much concerned about the political economy of national security and also the I would say the exploitation of the multifaceted complex regulations such as trade controls and sanctions. So my question to you especially would be, what do you think is the unexpected side effect of imposing too much multifaceted complex regulations such as trade controls and sanctions? So.
Good question. Minister Yoon, we'll collect questions.
Thank you. I'd like to thank all the panelists for their enlightening comments. I learned a lot. my question goes to Dr. Noland, and what do you think about the future of President Trump's kind of mercantilist policy, imposing high tariffs and planning to build manufacturing industries in the United States? I'm asking that question because you said that semi-skilled labor is one hurdle in terms of U.S.-South Korea shipbuilding industries, cooperation. So I think the labor issue is important if he wants to build, manufacturing sector in the United States. What do you think about sustainability of that kind of policy vision, and does domestic political dynamics inside the United States support that kind of vision?
Thank you. Gentleman over there, you have a mic, and then I'll go to the rising star young man there. Quickly,
yeah.
questions, please.
Yes, question. This follows on from what Mr. Noland said. He convincingly argued that the shipbuilding offer that South Korea is making to the United States doesn't make economic sense given the Jones Act, the steel tariffs, and the lack of semi-skilled labor in the United States. Does anyone on the panel think that it does make sense? Does perhaps former Trade Minister Yu think that shipbuilding, that Korea can go and set up a shipbuilding industry in the United States?
Very practical question. Last one.
I don't know how young you think I am, but I'll take that as a compliment. On SMRs, quickly, my understanding is they're just not commercially viable. It is possible to build small nuclear reactors. It's only the military that pays for them because they're very, very expensive, and you couldn't use them as a cheap alternative to natural gas or other sources of energy that we currently use. But that's my understanding. I have loads of questions, but I'll just ask one. Dr. Noland, you mentioned renewable energy. This conversation is kind of Pollyannish. None of you are arguing with each other, and I want to try and spark some debate. So I wanted to ask whether you are concerned and whether there are valid concerns in Washington about China's dominance of the supply chain surrounding both batteries and solar panels, or whether such concerns are overblown.
So, Dr. Noland, you're very popular, and also, we have a very good set of questions, and I think we have about 7 minutes. My watch was a bit faster, so it's good that we have a 7-minute lucky number. Now, with a speedy dating panelist discussion, but let's quickly do speed dating Q&A too. So, I'll invite Dr. Noland.
Short answer is no, it will not work. So if you put the tariffs on, you will get a certain amount of what we call tariff jumping, which is firms will engage in foreign direct investment in the United States to make a particular product. A lot of the origin of the foreign invested automobile industry stems from the 1980s when President Reagan put on so-called voluntary export restraints on Japan, and they jumped. But as a general matter, it will not lead to an industrial revitalization because the United States, as some of you heard last night John Hamre say, it becomes a high-cost island. Because of these tariffs, in general, manufacturing will not be competitive in the United States. So the modeling work we've done, and quite a bit of it is now in the public domain if you go to the Peterson website, and another big thing we're working on ought to come out in the next month or so, it shows that manufacturing output and employment actually declines under these policies, and there's a shift into the service sector. On the supply chain concerns, yes, I think those are reasonable concerns. I just think the way that the Trump administration is going about it is self-defeating. It's like the first Trump administration where he went out and picked trade wars with Europe, Japan, Korea, Canada, and then said, okay, let's go fight with China. Well, you've just alienated all your allies. And he's doing the same thing now. He's picking fights with everyone in the entire world. And then he says, let's, all charge fees on Chinese ships entering your port and things like that. Well, why would anybody be favorably, inclined to cooperate with the United States on those circumstances? So yes, I think the concerns are valid. No, I think the way they're going about trying to address them is very efficacious.
Thank you. Your question was very good, but Minister Yu, as you know, it's a complex question. So if you can really do quickly, then I'll invite a few others.
So first, that's a really good question because sometimes I wonder economic security, it lies in the eyes of the beholder. You said, Kazuto-san mentioned managing risks, but what risks? Depending on where you sit, each has different risk perceptions and assessment. So there will be always unintended consequences or side effects, whatever you call that. It imposes undue restrictions and sometimes restrictions and burdens on businesses, and sometimes, for example, semiconductor sector. If you cannot sell semiconductors to China, somehow they need quite massive capital investment to maintain the technological development, but they don't have now stream of income that can be put into R&D or other investment for semiconductors. So in that sense, it can stifle our innovation and our technological development and advancement and competitiveness. That's my short answer to you. May I also add my just 1 minute answer to your question on shipbuilding?
Make the case.
Between the two not making the case, perhaps we can think about some exception or some room for the Jones Act so that we can actually build ships here in Korea and export it to the US, because regarding the two factors, steel and human resources, manpower, still maybe US can give us some sort of exemption or a quota, whatever it is for those steel that is needed for shipbuilding. But human resources, even in Korea, if you go to Ulsan, which has Hyundai shipbuilding companies, you see a lot of foreign workers there. The 30% of their workers are from Southeast Asia countries or other countries around the world, because Korea, even though we have large manpower compared to the US, but for shipbuilding, it is a really labor-intensive industry. So my suggestion would be whether US can find any room, flexibility, or exception for Jones Act or building ships in other countries, especially if it is allied or like-minded country.
Thank you, Minister, for that comment. For our last 3 minutes, according to my iPhone watch, it's more precise now. I'd like to invite Professor Suzuki and Professor Gao kind of wrap up our session. I mean, it's not going to be another round of debate, but, I'll give you this special opportunity, 1 minute opportunity for you to kind of wrap up our conversation. Okay. And you didn't really emphasize economic security angle from China's perspective. If you can do that, that would be great too.
Oh, 1 minute.
Okay, thank you very much. Many questions actually related with China, but I don't have enough time. But I just want to say, okay, China, of course, we know every country has their own problem, but most problem are actually originating from domestic affairs. But the question, I think, what I want to emphasize today, the reason why I totally oppose the reciprocal tariffs, partly because we not question this globalization leads some problem, but I want to question the approach. How can we settle the problem? I think from China side, I think the only way is we sit down together, negotiate, and peacefully dialogue to find the mutual, based on mutual respect, and find a solution for the good governance of a global economy.
Thank you, Professor Gao. Professor Suzuki.
Right. So wrapping up in 1 minute, I think one of the things that we can take away from this panel is that the economy has its own logic. So if you try and use those political measures like tariffs or regulations, export control, sanctions, you can't really defy the economic logic. If cost is so high, then you can't really make the appropriate chips or appropriate steel, whatever. So I think the Trump administration are too overconfident about politics, and I think that's the problem. And this overconfidence on politics is actually using the economy as a weapon. And I think this sort of a weaponization of the economy is not really according to the market logic. And I think this is where the Minister Yu has mentioned about this, the balance between, to what extent you can use the economy as a weapon or to make the, stable international economic order. And I think Professor Gao's point is extremely important because the market logic depends on the trust. So I think if we don't have a trust, then it will be very difficult because there's always a risk. But, the risk means it's a political risk or the risk of using, or the country using that economy as a weapon. So this is why we are now being prepared to have some sort of economic security measures in order to make sure that the other countries, especially in United States and China, not use the economy as a weapon. So that's why we need to have the economic security measures, and therefore the collaboration between Japan and South Korea is important.
Thank you very much, Suzuki, Professor Suzuki. Ladies and gentlemen, we hope you enjoy these snapshots, and please join me in thanking our great panelists for today.